The Holocaust was an attempted genocide of the Jewish population by Nazis throughout Europe from 1939 to 1945. Between these years, an estimated 5.1 to 6.2 million Jews were killed as a result of murder, extreme labor, or medical experimentation, much of which occurred in prison camps run by the Third Reich in Nazi-occupied territories. Some of the most horrible prison camps included Auschwitz-Birkenau, Dachau, Treblinka, Ibenci, and Sobibor. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, at least 1.1 million people died, with 90% of them being Jewish. Dachau, the first Nazi concentration camp in Germany, accounted for 32,000 documented deaths, and thousands that went undocumented. At Treblinka, between 700 and 900,000 Jews and 2,000 Romani people were killed within the gas chambers. At Ibenci, tens of thousands of people ended up being worked to death while doing construction of tunnels in nearby mountains. Sobibor was more of an extermination than prison camp, and an estimated 200 to 250,000 deaths occurred there. Sobibor is also well known for a revolt of the prisoners on October 14, 1943. 600 prisoners tried to escape and made it over the fence, but only 50 managed to evade capture. The 1987 movie Escape from Sobibor is based on this event. Throughout the Holocaust, many non-Jewish people usually just stood by and watched their former neighbors be gathered up and taken to concentration camps. Some were even cruel enough to collaborate with the Nazis, and many of these co-conspirators would benefit from the forcible seizure and eviction of Jews from their property. Righteous among the nations is used by the State of Israel to describe and honor people who risked not only their own lives, but the lives of their families as well during the Holocaust in order to save Jews from complete annihilation by the Nazis. Some common methods of help given by the righteous among the nations included hiding Jews, sometimes on their own property, caring for them and getting them everything they needed, providing Jews with false papers and identities, smuggling or helping Jews get out of Europe and other dangerous locations, and rescuing children. Unfortunately, this meant some parents would have to separate from their children in order to protect them. Someone well known as righteous among the nations was Oskar Schindler, a German entrepreneur and Nazi Party member turned Jewish rescuer. Schindler grew up in a small community in Sudetenland, and when it was annexed to Nazi Germany in 1938, Schindler was officially a member of the Nazi Party. In September of the following year, he visited the city of Krakow. Many German entrepreneurs like himself saw this city as one that could make him a lot of money. Schindler began to earn his money through takeover of factories previously owned by Jews. Within 3 months, he had a workforce of around 250 Polish workers. Some of them were Jewish. Towards the end of 1942, his factories covered an estimated 45,000 square meters, and he had almost 800 men and women working for him. Now, 370 of them were Jewish. He lived a lavish lifestyle and appeared to be like every other German business owner. However, there was something that set him apart from the others. He was kind and caring towards his workers, especially the Jewish ones. Over time, as he witnessed the cruelty and brutality towards Jews, Schindler began to develop a disgusted view of the Nazis. At this point, he slowly began to use the large sum of money he had made and put it towards rescuing as many Jews from the clutches of the Nazis as he could. Doing this also put his own life at risk. His workplaces were called business essential to the war effort by the Military Armaments Inspectorate. This allowed him to prevent the deportation of his Jewish workers under the control of the SS, claiming that it would hinder their war efforts. When workers were temporarily unable to work, he would cover it up and protect them from being taken to concentration camps or killed. Schindler frequently made trips to different places and discussed ways to help with relief for the Jews. In March of 1943, all Jews left in the Krakow ghetto were being taken to the forced labor camp Plaszow. He talked to his drinking friend and commander of the camp, Amon Goeth, and convinced him to set up a sub-camp. At this camp, Schindler was able to provide Jews with easier work environments and a healthier amount of food, which he bought on the black market using his own money. Towards the end of 1944, most of the concentration camp inmates were sent to extermination camps. Everyone who worked for Schindler from WWII were supposed to be moved to a new factory to work, but instead, the 800 men and 300 women on Schindler's list were taken to Grosslosen and Auschwitz. Schindler managed to get the release of the men from Grosslosen, and then sent his personal secretary to Auschwitz for the release of the women. Another heroic event that took place involving Schindler was when he and his wife attempted to rescue 120 Jewish male prisoners. The men were being transferred in sealed wagons for 7 days without food and water, and in the middle of winter. When he and his wife had finally gotten back from obtaining food, Schindler convinced the commander he desperately needed the men for work. Upon the opening of the wagon, 13 of the men were dead. The rest were frostbitten and emaciated. Oscar and his wife gradually nursed the survivors back to health. When the commander wanted to incinerate the bodies of the dead, Schindler objected and obtained a burial for them with traditional religious customs. Schindler once said, "I just couldn't stand by and see people destroyed. I did what my conscience told me I must do." After he died in October of 1974, some Holocaust survivors brought his body to Israel and laid him to rest in the Catholic cemetery of Jerusalem. On his grave read the inscription, "The unforgettable rescuer of 1,200 persecuted Jews." Oscar and Emily Schindler were given the Righteous Among the Nations title in 1993. Another person given the Righteous Among the Nations title was Irina Sendler, a Polish Catholic social worker. Upon the eruption of World War II, Sendler was working for the welfare department of the Warsaw municipality. Sendler's job gave her an advantage in helping the Jews, but when the Warsaw Ghetto was sealed off, she faced great difficulty. Around 400,000 people were crammed into a small area given to the ghetto, and conditions were highly unsanitary. There was a major lack of food and medical supplies, resulting in an increase in death rates. Even though it put her at great personal risk, she created many plans to get into the ghetto in order to help people. She obtained a permit from the municipality, allowing her to get into the ghetto. She claimed it was to inspect the sanitary conditions. Instead, she got in contact with the Jewish Welfare Organization and helped them out. First, she smuggled Jews out of the ghetto and hid them when they were out. In 1942, the Council for Aid of Jews was created, and Sendler was one of the most important members. Unfortunately, when the council began to push its efforts harder, most of the Jews of Warsaw had been killed. However, despite this, they still managed to care for so many Jews who were hiding, trying to hide, and paying for medical care. In September of 1943, Sendler was given the title of Director of Zagoda's Department for the Care of Jewish Children. With this position, she contacted people in charge of orphanages and institutions for abandoned children in order to send Jewish children there. Many of these places were religious and run by nuns. On October 20th, 1943, Sendler was arrested. Despite her arrest, she was able to hide incriminating evidence like coded addresses of Jewish children and the money that was being used to pay those helping the Jews. After her arrest, Irina was sentenced to death and sent away to Pawiak prison to await her fate. However, underground activists bribed officials in the prison to release her. Even though she was almost executed, she continued to help people. However, the authorities were watching her very carefully, and this resulted in her having to go into hiding. On the 19th of October in 1965, Irina was recognized as Righteous Among the Nations. Raoul Wallenberg was a Swedish humanitarian whose heroic efforts to save the Jews in World War II also gave him a spot as Righteous Among the Nations. Raoul Wallenberg had begun his work to save lives when he was appointed as secretary in the Swedish embassy in Budapest, automatically giving him full diplomatic privileges. The reasoning behind this decision surrounded the fact that Sweden was under a large amount of pressure from Jews in need of protection through passports and/or visas. Throughout the early 1940s, Raoul made many trips to Nazi-occupied territories. Upon arrival to the Hungarian capital in July of 1944, he not only gave out 650 passports to Jews who had a connection with Sweden, but he issued thousands of protective letters, which allowed Jews to enter Swedish-friendly countries. And he also purchased houses under the Swedish flag and housed Jews in them. Holders of the protective letters were able to be exempted from forced labor and wearing the Yellow Star of David on their clothing. This was only the beginning. When October of 1944 hit, Jews were being slaughtered in the streets, or drowned, or shot in the Danube River in Budapest. In order to save as many of them as possible, Wallenberg resorted to bribing and or blackmailing people to help finance his operation. When the Arrow Cross Rule was established, Adolf Eichmann ordered the deportation of all the Jews in the city. At first, Wallenberg's protective letters were voided, but after much protest were reinstated, but ignored by the Nazis. Still, Eichmann ordered a death march of Jews to the Australian border. Wallenberg and his colleagues followed close behind the march, and, despite being threatened with guns, they distributed food, clothing, and medications. Because of the constant threat of harm and death he was under by the Arrow Cross Army and Adolf Eichmann, Wallenberg slept in a different house every night. Sometime later, just before Soviets entered the city, Wallenberg told his colleague from the Swedish legation, her anger, "I've taken on this assignment, and I will never be able to go back to Stockholm without knowing inside myself that I'd done all a man could do to save as many Jews as possible." Upon their arrival to the city on January 17, 1945, he was taken by Soviets, supposedly to have a meeting with a leader higher up in the rankings. As he was led to a Soviet vehicle, he said, "I don't know whether I am being taken as a guest of the Soviets or as their prisoner." He was never seen again. In 1956, the Soviets claimed that he had died in prison in 1947, but to this day, nobody truly knows what became of him. It is estimated that he saved around 100,000 Jews before his disappearance. On November 26, 1963, Yad Vashem recognized Raoul Wallenberg as righteous among the nations. These are only 3 of several people with the title of righteous among the nations, and all of these people risked everything they had in order to save the lives of others.